On today's show, we are less than 1 week away from the NBA draft. Of course, it is now crunch time, and I'm joined on today's podcast by my friend Ben Pfeifer, who covers the NBA draft all year long. This is part 1 of 2, and it's coming up right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1744 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday afternoon here in late June as the NBA draft is rapidly approaching. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. The place to go is prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. When you get there, use the promo code LockedOnNBA for a first-time deposit match up to $100. Also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast, as I always do, to make us your first listen each and every day. Check it out and subscribe to Locked On Hawks across podcast platforms. That includes Apple and Spotify and Overcast on the audio side, as well as YouTube on the video side. And I'm joined on today's show by Ben Pfeifer. Ben's been on the show many times before, covering the NBA draft, including once back in March during this cycle. And not a ton of news right now. If you missed it, I had Ricky O'Donnell on the show for a 2-part episode. Really yesterday, as I'm releasing this podcast on Thursday. At the top of that, I did a little bit of a checkup on the latest intel and rumblings and reporting. Most of that still applies right now. Also, earlier this week, I had Sam Vecini on the show of The Athletic, and he released a new mock draft today. For example, I did a solo show, including some Landry Fields press conference thoughts. It's actually going to be episode 5 and 6 of the week as I do this 2-parter with Ben Pfeifer. So plenty of stuff to come. I'm doing a little bit of ejecting from Atlanta this weekend. So this will probably be the last set of episodes until later, probably Sunday night into Monday. But if news breaks, I will obviously be on it as soon as I possibly can. And obviously it's silly season. So there's lots of intel, lots of maybe smokescreen intel, all that fun stuff's flying around, and we'll sort of update that. I'll try to do my best as well on social media. If you want to follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks, follow me there as well at BT Roll if you'd like to. And without any further delay, here's part 1 with myself and Ben Pfeifer, with part 2 to come in the same podcast feed as soon as part 1 is over. I'm joined now by Ben Pfeifer, a second-time person on this podcast this cycle, and I'm not even sure how many times previously. Hello, how are you, Ben?
A lot. I'm good. Thank you, Brad, for accommodating my lateness today. But excited to come and talk about the Hawks. As I said to him just a second ago, certainly didn't think we'd be talking about the number 1 pick when we were talking about the Hawks in March. I don't really even know if we talked about the top guys much at all.
Kind of, but not. Yeah, we kind of focused a little bit further down. Yeah, I mean, Ben came on, I think pre-tournament, maybe like mid-March, something like that, to kind of do like the almost there kind of draft primer thing that we did in between while the Hawks were still playing games and well before the lottery and all that. So a lot has changed, of course, and number 1 pick is number 1 pick. I've asked this to everyone, but I'm going to ask you, throw out the intel for a second, analysis only. What would your board of kind of, not even necessarily like which players in what order right now, but like how many guys do you think are like even in consideration for you at number 1 overall versus like, it seems like the Hawks board, well, I should say seems like, I'm not reporting this, but it's basically seems to be 3 players.
Right. Based on the reporting that we can glean from.
Yes. And, online, offline, et cetera. How big would that pool be for you if you were in charge?
I would consider 2, those being Sarr and Holland. Holland is not going to be
he's not going to go there. It's actually the exact same thing. So it's funny. I had Ricky O'Donnell on of the last episode, and Ricky said the exact same thing. Ricky was like 2.
Ricky.
So he said the same player as you did. So
draft internet type opinion.
Well, I think I will also. He has Topic as like his guy in this class. Obviously, he gave the caveat because he's hurt and all that, but that's his other guy. So anyway,
I love Topic too. I don't think that would make sense for Atlanta, but
of course not. Yeah, but
But yeah, Sarr, I guess the realistic ones is the one that I would be like, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a good place to jump off of this, right? Because if anything, and look, we're recording this just for everybody knows, late Wednesday. I don't know when it's going to run, probably Thursday at some point. It seems almost like Sarr is like getting the least hype of the three right now, as far as like the actual practical pick is concerned. Now that could change 5 times between now and Wednesday. But if we just sort of acknowledge that Holland isn't going to be the pick and Sarr's your other option, what's the case for Sarr? Obviously, that's very broad, but you like him enough to have him that high. What do you like about him? And then we'll kind of go and circle back of like what you may not be as in love with.
Yeah, I think Sarr is pretty easily the guy out of the realistic options for me. Starts on the defensive end, where to me he's the best defensive prospect in this class. The Hawks were a tragic defense last year and don't have the greatest defensive roster. You know, they have Jalen Johnson, Onyeka's all right, but they could really use a defensive star. And I think Sarr has the potential to be that. And I think he's going to be an impactful defensive player right away, at least in some capacity. He's a really special mover, ground coverage type, and exists in the spectrum of these Mobley, Chet, Wemby, Jaren, Giannis, modern perimeter, almost somewhat perimeter-oriented bigs, where they can cover the ground, do a bunch of different stuff in the pick and roll, comfortable on switches and short hedges and blitzes, and then can also rotate from the perimeter to the interior to cover ground and to help and to come from the weak side. Sarr obviously has to add strength, but I think that's a pretty common thing for most teenagers. That's not like totally scaring me off. I do that interior defense, like the technique, him not being the most vertically explosive guy, probably my biggest overall concern with him defensively. But I think he has a good chance to be a player who's in all defense conversations every single year. And then offensively, while he certainly is raw, I think Atlanta, we've been kind of, I feel like I've been saying on this podcast for years now that they're the place to get these progressing offensive players to because of Trae, because of how Trae gives you like a 5% field goal percentage uptick just by the virtue of how many open shots he's going to create for you. And I think that's going to be super beneficial for Sarr, a guy who didn't really have playmakers like that in the NBL. Bryce Cotton's an Australian legend, but that guy likes to get his shots up.
Hawks Summer League legend Bryce Cotton, by the way, at one point. Just want to throw that out there.
He's a bucket, but you know, understandably, sometimes not the most willing passer to teenagers on his team. But Sarr is a pretty troubling finisher. Like, he's just very weak, and the core strength and the leaping isn't great. His shooting is inconsistent, but his driving and the flashes of handling and beating bigs off the dribble, using his fluidity, his mobility, his passing improved a ton over the year. I think he's fairly comfortable, like on the short roll, which is a really important place to be comfortable in a Trae Young-led offense, which he showed flashes of. And I think that's important, that he showed some real passing on the move potential, which I think while it's not consistent, the fact that he was able to do those higher level reads at times made me really optimistic. And the fact that he was a really impressive, like mid-range pull-up scorer this year, which bodes well for 3-point development. And again, like, he's going to get so many easy open looks from three that those are going to be really helpful. And I think Sarr at number one, even for an established team like Atlanta, I always think you have to go for upside, or it's just kind of a misuse of the resource. Like, I get there aren't going to be many trade down options, but I would imagine they could find a trade out straight up for like a player if they really wanted to. But I think Sarr, while, you know, maybe not as quote unquote safe or pro ready as a Clingan or a Risacher, and again, I don't think the Hawks are a Clingan or a Risacher away from contending, and I doubt they think that either. At least I would kind of hope they don't. Where they're still going to need a year or two of acquiring assets and developing guys. I think they can get there, absolutely. I think Jalen Johnson's going to keep developing. Who knows what else they're going to do? Buffkin hopefully keeps developing. I don't know if the AJ Griffin ship has probably been sailed at this point, maybe. But maybe. Like, you don't need to win this second. Like, if Sarr isn't incredible year one, that's fine. Because I think there's a great chance that Clingan might have a better rookie season, but in 2 or 3 years, it's going to be like, okay, yeah, this guy's on a star trajectory, and we're glad we picked him, and we're glad we have this guy for the foreseeable future.
Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks, and at PrizePicks, you can turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game when watching your favorite sports this summer. You can make a lineup at PrizePicks in as little as 60 seconds, which is huge if you're busy like I happen to be throughout the summer, really all year long. All you have to do is pick more or pick less than 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you are locked in with PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. They have over 5 million active members. Get on the daily action right now with your friends and become part of the PrizePicks community right now. Basketball means more PrizePicks, so are the star players. You get boosted payouts to select basketball stars that you won't find anywhere else. And even with the NBA season now over, the hoops action does not stop on PrizePicks. Women's basketball stuff, WNBA, etc., is getting started, and that means stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and winning up to 100 times the cash on watching them ball out. PrizePicks is the best way to get on the action in more sports, and honestly, across more than 30 states in the country, and that includes California, Texas, Georgia, etc. And they have quick withdrawals of PrizePicks. You download this PrizePicks app right now today and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for first-time deposit match up to $100. One more time, download the app, use promo code LOCKEDONNBA when you get there for first-time deposit match right now with the folks at PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with PrizePicks. Yeah, there's this interesting philosophical discussion, especially with regards to, sometimes I'll refer to like the Hawks trying to win. And I mean that more as they're not in a full rebuild more than anything else. Like I contrasted them with the Wizards in particular, like, whoever else you want to throw out there. Maybe the Spurs are a little bit different now because they have Wemby, but the Wizards are the direct contrast. The Wizards picking second. They're clearly not in win now mode at all. They're in asset accumulation mode. And when I say the Hawks are trying to win now, I don't mean that they're one player away from winning the championship or even being a contender next year. What I mean is, I think they might, and I'm not saying this is correct, I think they might value ability to help more sooner than maybe I would at this point in time, for instance. Like I think some of the Clingan buzz, I think, emanates from they might believe that he could help them pretty soon. And I think that might be true, but how much you value that is up for debate. And also, I've said this before, but Sarr is not like the easiest plug and play fit with the Hawks personnel. And I don't really mean the centers necessarily. Like it's because I think people kind of gotten that confused because I'm kind of the known Clint Capella advocate for one thing. I'm not saying you can't, like, Capella's not, as much as I love him, is not like a huge part of the plan moving forward, very obviously. If you want to consider a Okongwu, I get that. They do consider Jalen flat out. Like that's as they should. He's a core piece of them. Yeah, I think for me it's Trey, Jalen, and then you figure out the rest. That's my opinion. But I'm glad you brought it up early in this discussion because there is that thought about Sarr where if he's not a clear guy, like if he's in a tier, I could see not preferring him in Atlanta because of the potential fit questions, especially like I want to ask you this. Do you view him as a center long term? Like, and how much does that matter to you? Because if he's more of a 4, it gets a little bit trickier, I think, potentially. Whereas if you view him, and look, as a rookie, is he going to be able to anchor your defense as a center? I kind of don't think so. Rebounding wise, all those things.
Right?
Yeah,
basically but nobody can, except for the two that did this year.
I was going to say though, but you just said the same thing, and I'll say it again. You're not drafting for his rookie season, so it's like, what do you think is going to be in 3 years, and what do you make of that? Like, it doesn't even matter to you positionally what he actually is.
I see him as a center down the line. Absolutely. I mean, he's a legit 7-footer with center size. And I think while maybe he has some of the available ball handling and potential shooting skills to play the 4, I think those are much more deadly at the 5, where the level of mobility and skill of the average perimeter defender you're going to be facing as a center are much lower than at the 4 or as a wing. And I think Sarr, like, assuming he can bulk up, which a lot of young players do, right? Like, this isn't, it has to happen. It's not guaranteed, but I don't think it's a crazy ask that Sarr, while probably most comfortable on the perimeter now, and I think you can be at 5 and be more perimeter oriented. We see that in the league, but defensively, he is going to be best as a center. I think most weaponized when he can guard literally every single pick and roll coverage after hopefully learning technique and all that stuff. He has the tools and the flashes to do everything you want your modern 5 to do. And I think that's his best position long term. Maybe not early in his, like we said, not his rookie year, but long term, I think Sarr, like, maybe you can like a power 4 wing, but I think Sarr's ultimate ceiling will come as a center, however you want to.
Right. And you could kind of debate later on, like, who he plays with in the front court, what you would want next to him. And we'll save some of that because we could talk about him forever. I've said this a couple times, but I have had Sarr as my number 1 guy on my board, kind of like even just non-Hawks. Like, I mean, big board, generally speaking. I think I still do. I certainly understand there is nuance in what team by team might say. And I think just from what you just said, I don't think I have him differentiated from the pack as much as you might, non-Holland division. Like, I think, honestly, and this is not a popular answer, but I'm kind of just unmoved by all of these guys. I mean, maybe it's like,
I think that's totally fair. I mean,
and maybe it's this part of the cycle.
It's not a great draft. Like,
it's not, and at the top, and maybe it's this part of the cycle where we're all kind of just tired of everyone. That's kind of the nature of the beast when people that do this all the time. But because you kind of gave the pitch for Sarr, and I think that it makes a lot of sense, especially defensively. I agree with you. For that's what actually does excite me is his defensive potential. I will certainly raise my hand and say that does excite me, literally. Offensively, I'm a little less excited, I gotta say. So, is that fair? And what happens if it fails? Like, where would it go wrong if, let's just say, the Hawks draft Alex Sarr in 6 days as we're recording this podcast, and it doesn't work? I think it's going to be on offense if it doesn't work. But where do you see it breaking down, and like, why would it not work if it doesn't?
I think it's totally fair to be skeptical of his offense, even though I have Sarr as Sarr and Ron 1-1-1, 1A, 1B, and then a big gap between those. I don't think it's crazy to be lower on Sarr. Like, it's not like if you're like super low on Zion or like Wemby, I'm like, you're nuts.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying too. Like, I think Hawks fans have almost painted me as being like super low on him, and I'm not super low on him. It's just that I don't have him like in this.
His offense is very theoretical, right? In that most of it is flashes based, and there were moments in games where he put it all together and it looked absurd. But I think the main way that it fails is he ends up as a bad kind of tweener where he doesn't put on the kind of size and physicality to exist as a 5 and doesn't become a good enough shooter to exist as a perimeter, as a wingy type player. I would bet on one of those things happening because I think either way, that's a path to offensive success and offensive value. I doubt Sarr is ever going to be a star level offensive player regardless, even at his ceiling. But I do think the concern that he's just like not viable as a play finisher, because that's what he's going to be. Though I think Sarr's most interesting stuff long term is his creation potential, is what he can do with the ball in his hands. At least early in his career, he's going to be a play finisher. And I do think the idea is that in Atlanta, he's going to have a better chance to do that than he has anywhere else. A little while back, I tracked all of Sarr's half-court rim attempts, and the numbers were not great. But I will say, 20 for 21 on open shots, and that's like not significantly less than half of his attempts were at least one defender in the vicinity. And I would imagine that goes well up playing with Trey and the Hawks. And his touch is pretty interesting. Like, I think most of his layup issues are strength related at this point and explosion rather than touch. I think his touch is honestly pretty nice, and he could hit some tough fades and hooks and stuff. But yeah, his like bump ability to take contact with his chest and not get moved backwards and move guys backwards isn't great. But I think improving that balance and the strength, like it's rarely as simple as like get stronger, be good. But
but no, it's actually you brought this up earlier, and I almost asked you in the moment. I'll just do it now. There's this conception of Sarr that I've read in comments and even some articles and things about how he's this like super explosive vertical athlete, and I don't really see that.
No,
he's not a bad athlete, but like there's this thing. I think people have maybe seen highlights, whatever highlight you want to say, but like he's not a pick and roll like lob finisher type right now.
No. His athletic gifts are predicated on fluidity, ground coverage, mobility, speed, more in the horizontal plane where he can overwhelm other bigger players and has the size to overwhelm smaller players as well. But in the vertical plane, right, as a leaper, like there are moments where he'll like really get up and explode quickly in traffic for a dunk. I think there's flashes of it. He's not like a hopeless vertical athlete.
No.
But he isn't living above the rim, right? He does take a lot of stuff. And I think maybe the most concerning aspect to me is some of the wiring mentality stuff where sometimes I feel like he could impose himself physically and doesn't. But that's also it's common, but it's hard to really parse. Like that was a big issue Jalen Johnson had coming out, which I think he's working, progressing well towards remedying. I don't know if you'd agree with that. I think he's
he is. And look, it could also be age related. Not everybody. You're the other guy who we probably not do a ton on. Ron Holland is like this maniac by all accounts in a good way.
He's a psycho.
But Alex Sarr is, I'm not saying he's not like, we joke, Ricky and I, speaking of Ricky from the last show, Ricky kind of threw out the soft thing and not in a like makeup way, just the way he plays right now. He kind of floats sometimes. He's not like the most imposing guy. And he's more maybe that's he's 19 years old. Like
he's a finesse big at the moment.
He is. And honestly, there's this, I'm not even sure it's a rumor. There's been rumblings like, does he even want to play center? Like, and there's this back and forth about how maybe he doesn't want to come to Atlanta. And maybe, I'm not saying that's going to be out, but he hasn't worked out for the Hawks as you and I recording. He's not worked out for the Hawks. And I've heard from people, and look, it's not like ever been definitive, but it's like, he doesn't view himself as a big necessarily. I think he thinks he's going to be one of those perimeter guys. And look, a lot of guys are wired that way, and then they kind of maybe get forced into being more of a center as they go, or maybe the light comes on at some point. So I'm not saying it can't happen. It's just that's one of those questions that we really, especially on the outside, we can't answer. We have no idea. It's hard.
It's hard when that's like my biggest macro concern with him is will he flip the switch and be more physical? Because he can be really imposing at times. It's not like he's definitely physically limited, but compared to the average 19-year-old, I don't think he's far, but I think he's probably above average in terms of the physicality, athleticism, and stuff. Like, again, he's better than most of his age group. He just happened to be playing in a pretty good pro league, which certainly.
And by the way, a very physical pro league. Like the NBL is not a athletic league, but they are really physical with like a bunch of grown-ups in that league.
Right, a bunch of like strong, stocky, shorter bigs, which are famously terrible matchups for this archetype of like young future star, but really lanky, deer in headlights type. And I do think that definitely worked against Sarr, where some people are pricing it into his evaluation. Like that's an optimistic lens for me. Whereas like, I don't know, it's just easier sometimes to be finessey and like that in like college basketball, for example.
Yeah.
Or even in the G League where there's a lot of young players. But in like a league like the NBL, like not maybe as skilled or talented or athletic top to bottom, but there are some really good players in that league. And we've seen NBA players come out of that over the last couple of years. So I think the level of competition preparing him for the NBA is something that I think is never discussed enough with these non-NCAA guys. How big of a difference the jump. And Sarr went from playing overtime elite, which no slight to OTE, but it's like high schoolers basically.
It is high school. Yeah,
it's like AAU kind of, but like a little worse. I would say a good amount worse competition wise, but like it's high school aged kids mostly going straight from that. Obviously, he was dominant in like the youth, the French youth tournaments, playing his own age group or a little older, and then he goes to playing grown men every day, and that's a huge jump that takes time to adjust to, and not a lot of teenagers are built for. Understandably, that's a lot to take on, and I do think. Well, again, it's not a given that Sarr is going to fix this stuff. I think it's a good bet to say he has all these skills and talents and tools. And it's like, if he can do this thing that so many young players have done in the past, then he's going to be damn good.
Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for a small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the roles you have available. And that's why LinkedIn Jobs is a place that you have to check out right now. They have tools to find the right professionals for your team. They help you to do it faster, and they help you to do it for free. I've been on the hunt in previous days and years, honestly, to hire people for my day job, and it's been awesome to add LinkedIn Jobs to the mix, and it's hugely making the entire process easier and much more efficient. They know that businesses are often wearing a ton of different hats, and it might have time that's kind of constraints or resource constraints that you need to actually hire someone. But with LinkedIn, they are not just another job board. They have a network of more than 1 billion professionals. That makes it the best possible place to find someone to hire. Gives you access to professionals that you can't find anywhere else, and they do it all, making the process easy and intuitive for you. Hiring is so much easier when you have that many quality candidates available to you. So easy, in fact, that 86% of businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours with LinkedIn Jobs. They'll help you find the ways to make the process easier, and 2.5 million small businesses are using LinkedIn Jobs for hiring purposes. Post your job right now for free by going to linkedin.com/lockedonnba. One more time, that is linkedin.com/lockedonnba. Terms and conditions apply. I want to move off of Sarr and get into other guys, or else we can go forever on Sarr. So let's go to Risacher real quick, or not real quick, depending on what we want to do here. I got a DM from someone. I'm not trying to program the show based on what I hear from people, but they're like, "Why are you talking about Risacher more?" And it's like, well, it's fair that I probably haven't done that enough.
Big time, Brad.
Well, it is what it is. But and I tried with Ricky this week. I tried it with Sam. So I'm trying to do a little bit more of that because, look, he's very much in play, whether I think he should be or not. That's another discussion. The Hawks are considering him at the very top of the draft. And I find that people like you, people like that I trust that do this stuff a lot, there's a big split on Risacher. Like people that have him in that 1, 2, 3 range, and then people that have him, nobody has him super duper low, but it's like he's kind of maybe more meh for some people, like maybe mid-lottery kind of thing. Where do you fall on? I think obviously not at the top because you would have named him already, but what do you make of the Risacher experience given that he worked out in Atlanta on Wednesday and he's very much in play?
Yeah, I certainly land in the camp of don't particularly view Risacher as a top 3 pick in this draft, largely because of the ceiling and the special traits. It's hard for me to justify, even in a weaker draft, taking guys without special elite traits in the top. And I think that's where we land with Risacher. Where I think in like the late mid lottery, I think it's totally fine. I have him, probably like 10ish range on my board, where I think that's a totally acceptable range. But I understand the broader thinking, right? That the Hawks are a win now team, and Risacher would be able to contribute right away. You don't need to like game plan or really do much to get him going, right? He's a very, very traditional 3-and-D type wing, which is an archetype that I think has been overrated for kind of a long time. In terms of like stealing, especially like 3-and-D wings do what they do, but there's a limit, especially in the postseason, to these lower skill, lower athletic, lower defensive 3-and-D wings, where I just don't think they're as valuable as some people tend to give them credit for, unless they're really special. And I'm not sure Risacher is. And his handle to me, his burst, his ability to create separation on the ball, pretty much non-existent. He doesn't really pass the ball much at all. He's not like a bad passer. He can make extra passes and simple connective reads, but he's never really making any high-level quality reads. And then athletically, while he's pretty solid, like you'll see his highlights littered with big transition dunks in traffic and against contact, like he is super frail. Like he is really, really physically behind. And just like we talked about with Sarr, this is a normal thing for teenagers. I think Risacher is like on the lower end for his age group as well, in terms of athletic and physicality stuff, where he just really struggles to create separation and is not explosive, and the strength shows up. Where he excels athletically, though, is his agility and his bend. And I think that shows up especially on defense, where he is legit awesome screen navigator, point of attack defender against like wings down. I think that's, if there's a special, quote unquote, special elite trait with Risacher, that's it. His ability to stick like glue and trail around screens, both off the ball as a chaser and on the ball guarding screens. He's got great lateral quickness. He's tall and long and not long really. He's tall and lanky. And,
I mean, he's still long for like, if he's not playing the 4, he's still got good.
Sure,
it's
yeah.
like I think the reason I said that, just for people that don't know, his wingspan's only like 6'9.5", 6'10", which is not very big for a guy his height. But if he was, I mean, if he's playing small forward, it's totally fine. It's just,
I kind of see him as like a pure 3 is the thing. I don't think he has much versatility on either end, where like he does what he does really well, and that's kind of it. He's not going to protect the rim. He's not going to give you a ton of like defensive playmaking value. He's not really going to score for you. He's not going to be an interior guy on offense. And kind of as we preface with the Sarr conversation, the Hawks are not a Risacher away from competing. They're just not. It's not like not. There are hypothetical teams you could construct where you plop in a 3-and-D wing like Risacher, and within a year or two, you're winning a title. That's not the Hawks. And I think it's drafting Risacher and Clingan to the same extent, but I think it's, we'll talk about Clingan at some point, a little myopic for my tastes on the uber short term and maximize, making the playoffs next year, when the more valuable, assuming we're looking at it through the lens of winning a title, which of course we know that GMs and owners have other motives.
It's not always that. Yeah, no, I was gonna say it's not always that. And
right,
it's
not just like that. Obviously, a lot of great GMs do. Like that's their primary motive is let's make moves to win a title. Whereas a lot of teams, I'm not saying the Hawks are like this, but are like let's make moves to make us a playoff team or to make us good enough or to make us competitive right now. And I think those picks, Risacher, Clingan, any other like win now type, that's to me what that signals, which ultimately doesn't align with my philosophy and guys like Ricky and a bunch of other draft people who don't have monetary stakes in this.
Right. It is definitely easier, and I'm guilty of this too. Like I especially number one, like it is a different conversation, and this draft is a hard one for that because a lot of people just don't have a number one overall pick great on anybody, and I'm one of those people. I don't think that any of these guys are a traditional but even more, at least with Sarr, like we just kind of made the case. We don't have to do it again, but you can kind of see outcomes that resemble the number one overall pick with Alex Sarr. It's not hard to see if he gets there.
It's easy to imagine how he's great.
Right. Particularly with Risacher, I think even more so than Clingan. I struggle to see, because at least with Clingan, I think you can make the argument, when we'll get there in a second, that Clingan actually might be like legitimately really good pretty soon. Like, I don't really see Risacher being that good. I mean, because most, this is one of my bits, but most rookies are not good. They're just not. And I don't think that even, his traits are special enough to what you just laid out. I'm testing out a theory. I want to run it by you right now about Risacher. I think you have to think at least one of these two things about Risacher to have him even in the mix number one overall. You have to think that he is a really, really high level shooter, which some people do think that. If you think he's a great shooter, I understand it a lot more. That's one path. The second path is the defensive path, which I agree with you. I think I like the way he defends in a lot of different ways, but I think you have to think that he's like a really, really, really high level defender too. Like one of those two paths, you got to be sold on, I think. I'm not sold on either one of those paths personally, which is why I can't put him that high. Does that make sense as like a concept? I know it's intentionally broad, but like I feel like
the one that we share, if you're not as enamored with ceiling, I think is maybe I don't want to say as you should be. That's just like my opinion, my as personal view of draft philosophy and the best way to build a championship team. Where with like the number one pick, I think, even though this is a bad draft and this is not a great, like it's true, that doesn't mean there aren't good players and interesting upside swings. It's just that the upside swings this year come with more risk than usual, right? Like when like the risk associated with a guy like Wemby was just like basically zero. Or same with injuries with a guy like Zion, or even like I think like Cade, and I believe in like a Scoot or a Paolo. Like there's obvious upside, but the risk is pretty low. And then with guys like Sarr or Holland or like Collier or Topic or Dillingham or whoever I really like, I think there are still these really high-end outcomes where they can be impactful star level or fringe star level guys, but maybe just with a little more risk associated.
The floor's a lot lower than as you name those guys. So that's really what it comes down to. Like,
and I think that won't change my personal philosophy as the team picking number one. I think that doesn't deter me as much as maybe some people, where I like, again, hopefully in an ideal world, right? You trust your coaches and your player development staff and your guys. I guess if you're a self-aware GM, it's like my coaches or my staff sucks and I can't take a developmental guy because they're not going to develop, then I guess it's the smart thing to not do that. But once again, we have the privilege and the constraint of operating in a vacuum, right? And
it is easier on the outside.
Assuming you trust your guys, which hopefully you do, I think it still makes sense to say like, okay, yeah, we see the flaws, but I trust our guys to help Sarr learn how to shoot and get more physical and accustomed to the NBA. I trust Trey to help him learn how to space and move on offense versus like, Risacher is going to be solid.
Okay, that is all with part one of this two-part conversation that I had with Ben Pfeifer about the NBA draft. Part two should be available in your favorite podcast feed right now, whether it's Apple or Spotify or Overcast or YouTube. It should be there, and if it's not, let me know that, but it should be there right now as you're listening to this. So go ahead and flip on over to part two. Please subscribe to the podcast as well. Tell a friend about the show. Follow us on social media. Patreon.com/BT Rowland, all that fun stuff. Buckle up. Part 2 is coming back, and stay tuned. We'll see you all next time.